So in preparation for the exercise for the painters, painting a single object, I need to run you through the different parts that you're looking for that create form. So this is where we're talking about humps and reflected light and all of those things. So if we look at and think about how light falls on a sphere, we have the sphere and its cast shadow. Now remember, the cast shadow tells us as much about what's going on here within the object itself as anything that's going on here. They work in tandem. So if you've got a nice rounded cast shadow, it's telling you that this object is rounded, as opposed to, say for instance, with something that's cubic, its shadow would be more cubic as well, have much straighter edges rather than the curved edges of these. The first key thing that we need to think about when we're looking at something is the chiaroscuro, the broad light and dark pattern, and that's the first thing that you'll be doing in the painting as to what you'd capture. So if our light source is coming from this side, the broad chiaroscuro of this sphere would have a line there that marks the point where the light and the dark meet. So this area here, so the cast shadow and the shadow part of the object would be dark, and this part would be light, and that's called the chiaroscuro, that light dark pattern. It's where you have to decide either things are light or dark. This line on the object itself that defines where the light and the dark meet has a name, and we call that the terminator. And that's that where the light terminates and becomes dark, or back the other way, where the dark terminates and becomes light. Now each of these three parts, we can think about dividing them up into further three more parts. So the light has three parts, the shadow or the dark of the object has three parts, and the cast shadow will have three parts as well. When you're looking here in the light, you've got that bright highlight, which is the brightest and the lightest part of this half of the object. So that's the highlight, and it will be the light. That then identifies the next, and this is probably the hardest bit to see, which is what we call the light. Now it's this area surrounding the highlight here, and that we call the light, and it will be the mid-tone of that part. And then here, the last part is the half-tone, and it will be the dark of that part. Here in the dark side, we have three parts again. So the darkest part will be an area here, just beyond the terminator, and that is called the hump. And that will be the darkest part. This is the darkest part of the form, so no other area on the object itself will be darker than this, but there is an area that is darker again that we'll come to in a moment. The rest of here is called the dark, or the shadow, and that is the mid-toned part of this part of the form. The last part is this area down in here, which is the reflected light. Which will be the lightest part of this form. The interesting thing when you're coming and looking at this is that often the reflected light and the halftone here are the same tone. They are often a linking tone from one part to the other, so that creates cohesion in the whole if you have tones like that that link across the form. The last part here is in the cast shadow. So the cast shadow has 3 parts. The main part of the cast shadow is the penumbra, and it is the mid-toned part. We sometimes see, and you don't always see this, it depends on the strength of the light source here, an area of tone like that, that's an inversion of the cast shadow. And that's called an antumbra, but as I said before, you don't see that one very often. And the last part will be a dark area down in here under, and that is the umbra, and that will be the darkest tone. This is then also, the umbra will be the darkest tone in the whole as well. So remembering I said before, the hump is the darkest part of the form on the object itself, but the umbra is the darkest part of the whole when we talk about the reflected, when we talk about the cast shadow in relation to the object itself. So the umbra, and again, often you find the penumbra is a similar tone to, say, the hump, and is a linking across like that. So there's this repetition of the tones in each of these parts. One thing I'll note is that here within a cube there are all these parts as well. So in a similar light source we'd probably talk about the top there being the light, or probably actually the side here being the light. This side would have a halftone. This would be the dark, which would have a hump, reflected light down in here, and then an umbra into a penumbra. There's the light, and there probably would be a highlight along an edge or somewhere along here. So that has all the same parts. The one thing to note between these two, and these are the two extremes, is the quick transitions between each of these parts. They're sharp, and sharpness equals a cubic form. In a sphere, and if I quickly just draw down here a version of this, thinking about all these parts, what I'm looking for to create something spherical is a gentle transition from one to the next part. If I make the transitions too great, they lose that gentleness. Probably the sharpest would be there in the hump, in the umbra. There's the hump going in. See the reflected light appear. We'll take out the highlight. We'll take out the light, I should say, first. And then take out a highlight. I'll just darken that light up ever so slightly. So there you can see those transitions in action and how that gentle transition gives a feeling of roundness. So gentle transitions equals round.